JT Shaver here with New Layer, and one of the most common questions that I get asked is whether or not more expensive lights are actually worth the cost. In this video, we'll take a look at some budget options in the Godox LED1000Bi Mark II and the DigitalFoto Helios B100 and see how they compare to something higher end like the Intellytech Luma Cloud S-160. The first thing we'll look at is build quality, which is one of the biggest differentiators between budget and pro level gear. High-end lights are made to be used and abused, while budget lights are produced for solo creators that treat their gear as nicely as a family pet. Hopefully. The Godox panel is made of almost all lightweight plastic except for the barn doors and the mounting yoke. For the price, the Godox COB lights are really well built, but the panel lights don't quite live up to that same build quality. The main body of the digital photo light is made of metal, but the rest of it is still plastic. The yoke itself on the B100 is pretty sturdy, but the tightening knob that you use to attach it to a light stand is pretty flimsy. In contrast, the Intellytech light is made of all metal, and it would probably chip concrete if it tipped over before sustaining any real damage. The control screen is higher resolution, the knobs feel nicer, and just feels more substantial overall. That's not really surprising given that it's 24 pounds versus the Godox and the DigitalFoto light at 5.5 and 9.5 pounds respectively. The Luma Cloud also has dedicated buttons for presets on the back, and each barn door leaf can be removed without any tools. Each corner of the light has a beefy reinforcement with a hole in it so you can mount it to a truss system or stick a safety cable through there and things like that. Overall, the cheaper panels' build quality isn't necessarily bad. I just wouldn't really trust them with anyone that's not careful with their gear, and you can't really rent something like that out. Next, let's take a look at the brightness output of these three lights. I measured all three with my Sekonic C800 and got the following results. I did measure all of these lights at both their minimum and maximum color temperatures and took the higher number. The DigitalFoto panel came in at 8,650 lux, the Godox panel at 3,060 lux, and the Intellytech panel at 5,620 lux. You may look at these numbers and think that the Helios B100 is the obvious winner, but there's more to it than that. The Helios has a 60-degree beam angle, while the Luma Cloud has a 120-degree beam angle. Strangely, I couldn't find any beam angle information on the Godox panel. A tighter beam angle will give you more brightness right in front of the light, but it can create some limitations. For example, if you're trying to shoot into an external piece of diffusion, a tighter beam angle will give you more of a hot spot, while a wider beam angle will give you a softer overall light source. A wider beam angle is also really helpful when you're trying to bounce the light off of a large surface or if you're working in tight spaces. So by these measurements, it might seem like the B100 is brighter, but the Luma Cloud also has a bigger surface area in general. It also has the best diffusion by far, which will cause a bigger drop in brightness compared to less effective diffusion. Overall, the B100 is impressively bright, especially if you need something more focused to point at a single subject. But if you diffuse it to a similar size and softness as the Luma Cloud light, it will be dimmer. Another thing about a lot of budget lights is that they'll push the LEDs harder to get more overall brightness, which can have some downsides. One is that the overall lifespan of the light will be shorter, but that's not really a huge deal because most lights will outlast their owners anyway. The more important thing is that feeding them too much power will cause greater color shifts over time, or even greater color shifts in the middle of a single shoot. I highly recommend you let your lights completely warm up before taking a custom white balance to avoid that, no matter what lights you're using. Color accuracy is another place where a lot of budget lights can fall short, although over the last couple years they've done surprisingly well. To start with, I measured all of these lights to see how accurately they match their advertised color temperatures. The DigitalFoto light measured 3,250 Kelvin on the low end and 5,968 Kelvin on the high end. The Godox light measured 3,387 Kelvin and 5,763 Kelvin. And the Intellytech light measured 3,208 Kelvin and 5,537 Kelvin. These lights are all advertised at 3,200 to 5,600 Kelvin, with the exception of the Godox, which for some reason only goes down to 3,300 Kelvin. With all that said, the Intellytech Luma Cloud is as close to the advertised color temperature as you're ever gonna find. The Godox panel isn't bad at all, but the Helios B100 is 368 Kelvin off on the high end, which could be significant. With the lights all set to their minimum color temperatures, I got a CRI of 94.2 for DigitalFoto, 96.2 for Godox, and 97.9 for Intellytech. If we look at the R9, R13, and R15 values, which are the most important ones for rendering skin tones, the two cheaper panels actually have great numbers, but the Luma Cloud S-160 has exceptional numbers. They might even be the highest that I've ever seen. CRI is only part of the puzzle, and if we take a look at the tungsten SSI of each light, we get 79 for DigitalFoto, 80 for Godox, and 86 for Intellytech, which is a huge difference. With the lights all set to their maximum color temperatures, I got a CRI of 93.7 for DigitalFoto, 96.7 for Godox, and 96.5 for Intellytech. I also get a daylight SSI of 72 for both DigitalFoto and Godox, and 74 for the Intellytech Luma Cloud. So the Helios CRI drops off a bit on the daylight end, and not surprisingly, the Intellytech Luma Cloud has the best overall scores. If you want to see all the measurements I took for all of these lights, I'll have a link in the description to my light comparison tool, which uses real-world measurements so you can fairly compare lights from different brands. Another thing to consider is the overall light quality. What I mean by light quality is the overall combination of beam angle, fall off, shadow softness, and things like that. Obviously, the bigger the light source, the softer the light it produces. Size isn't the only consideration because cheaper panels typically don't have as good of diffusion to get the most brightness out of them as possible, but there are side effects to that. One is that you can get these weird striped or checkered shadows because you have a lot of little light sources instead of one big soft one. More expensive lights typically have better diffusion, so you don't get any weird shadow issues, and you'll get a better roll off between the highlights and shadows. The diffuser that comes with the Godox panel is borderline useless just because it's too transparent. I see it more as a protective cover than anything. The diffusion on the Helios B100 is more opaque, so it is more effective. Another cool thing about the B100 is to add or remove the diffuser, there's a little spring-loaded button, so you just press that to pop it in or out. Like I said earlier, the diffusion on the Luma Cloud lights is by far the best. It'll give you one huge soft light source without any hot spots at all. The only downside to the diffusion on the Luma Cloud light is you can't remove it, but that's pretty typical of higher end lights. When it comes to power options, smaller lights usually only let you use AC power or NPF batteries. Mid-size or large lights like these move up to V-mount batteries, which do give you longer runtime, but they are more expensive. Both the Godox and DigitalFoto panels accept regular 14.8 volt batteries, and the Luma Cloud lights actually don't support any batteries at all. There's other higher end options with battery capabilities, but if you're setting lights up in a studio where they're not going to move, then it doesn't really make sense to pay for something you won't use, so it just depends on your needs. You can, however, use something like a portable power station with regular household outlets. I have the TacLife P50 and it has two 110 volt outlets and supports up to 300 watts continuously. The last thing I want to talk about is remote control. For solo operators or YouTubers, a dedicated remote or a mobile app is what most people prefer. More professional lights get into other protocols like DMX, which luckily all three of these lights support. The Godox light comes with the RCA5 Mark II remote, which is the same remote that controls the VL and UL series of lights, so if you have some of those, that's a consideration. The Helios B100 can be purchased with an optional remote for just $10 more, but it is proprietary to that specific light. There is no remote control option for the Luma Cloud because, like I mentioned before, it's meant to be used in a studio setting with a DMX board or to be controlled from the back of the panel. I'm not trying to convince you one way or another because, like I always say, there's never a best light for every situation. If you're a solo creator or a YouTuber, then of course one of the budget options might be your best choice. If you work on bigger productions with a team of people, or you like to rent your gear out when you're not using it, or you just want the best possible light quality, higher end lights will give you that with less compromise. Both the Godox LED1000Bi Mark II and the DigitalFoto Helios B100 are $299. The Intellytech Luma Cloud S-160 is $999 and the smaller S100 is $799. The Intellytech lights might seem pretty expensive, especially compared to the Godox and DigitalFoto panels, but some lights are 2 to even 5 times more expensive than that. So things like the Luma Cloud lights are a huge step up in some aspects for relatively low additional cost. Before you go, leave a comment and let me know if the extra cost of something like the Luma Cloud is worth it to you. Links are in the description if you want to check any of these lights out further. That's it for now, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.